Another Tasmania Talks podcast. Go to tasmaniatalks.com.au for anything you've missed.
Let me bring in here Lynn Cleaver. Now, Lynn was in fact one of the first people I spoke to about the medicinal cannabis issue when it became kind of obvious that it was going to happen. Now, Lynn's son, Jeremy, is, it's fairly horrific. He has really, really bad seizures. And unfortunately, again, as I mentioned to Kay, some of the medications used have the impact of leaching calcium out of bones. So poor Jeremy, when he does have a significant seizure, he busts up his body something horrible. I've seen the X-rays; they're just not pretty. Lynn's been fighting to have Jeremy put on the controlled access scheme for medicinal cannabis, and as I mentioned, is that third unsuccessful so far applicant. Given the again, they're not exactly the same, but given the similarity of at least the impact of each of these two young men's conditions, why one is apparently okay and good and 6 weeks in, and the other one is still held up is doing my head in a bit, as I'm sure it is Lynn's. Let's bring her in here, Lynn Cleaver from Mount Direction. G'day, Lynn. How you going?
Not too bad, thanks, Brian. How are you?
Look, I'm okay. That must frustrate the hell out of you listening to Kay there, surely.
Oh, it was really quite emotional for me to hear how well Joe is doing. Look, it's just the most fabulous thing, isn't it?
It is to get some good news out of what's obviously been a 25-year horror story for both of those lovely people. And look, you're in a not dissimilar situation. I know Jeremy's condition's not exactly the same, but it'd be fair to say that the impact on life and the symptoms of the condition are largely similar, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, epilepsy, generally speaking, uncontrolled seizures are not kind to the body or the brain. So the sooner you can get those seizures uncontrolled, the better.
Okay. Your situation's been a little different in that you have been using illicit cannabis to treat Jeremy for some time now, whereas Kay had not done that until the controlled access scheme. Do you think that's impacting you on your progress through it?
I'm not sure. Well, the interesting thing is that that Joe and Jeremy did have the same professor caring for them. Jeremy no longer has that professor caring for him. I'm not sure why that's happened, but I'm thankful that we were brave enough to put plants in the ground again this year, because obviously Jeremy doesn't have a legal cannabinoid medicine.
You obviously fear then the sirens up and down the street. Are they coming for us today? Because we have got people in other states being arrested for doing exactly this. Yeah, it's a constant fear, and as I've said to you previously, we're not afraid of the law. We're not afraid of the charges. We're just concerned that if they do knock on our door, potentially they won't ever knock. They will confiscate his medicine, and that could be a life and death situation for Jeremy. So ideally, if there's no path for us to get a legal medicine, at least put some protections in place for people like Jeremy so their medicine does not get confiscated. You call for on that basis a register for medicinal home growers so that they could be exempt from any potential police raids. There's an incredible reluctance to do that because the thinking is it would lock in the illicit supply chains rather than get people onto the legitimate supply chains. But this is where we run into a problem, because it's not easy, is it? It's not an easy access thing. Controlled access, it is very much so. How controlled is it, Lynn?
We can't even get our foot in the door, Brian. We can't get a neurologist to see him. So, yes, it would be really nice to have a legal medicine, but the main issue here is that, particularly in the Launceston area, there are no neurologists to care for patients like Jeremy. So it's frustrating. I don't even know what to say.
I can't even imagine, Lynn. Tell me, how many medications a day is Jeremy taking other than the cannabis?
When we started cannabis, he was on 3 anticonvulsants, and now he's just on a very, very small dose of 1.
Right. Okay. So the equation at your place is fewer prescriptions for the pharmaceuticals because the side effects are not great, and the substitute for that is coming from effectively your backyard. You can see the equation there doesn't really work for the industry, does it?
No. I guess, and we're not alone. There are thousands of us, thousands of families just like us, growing cannabis for themselves or their loved ones, and that will continue.
Yeah.
The illicit growth will continue, especially while these access schemes are impenetrable for people. It's just too hard for many people.
What I find interesting is the hoops that you're being made to jump through at the specialist level in order to get access to these substances. And when I say hoops, I mean what was Joe was monitored there for I think a week, wired up with video cameras and all kinds of stuff in order to write what is a relatively simple prescription. I find the level of monitoring required disproportionate when you consider the amount of testing that's sometimes not done on prescription drugs that can come through the legitimate pharmaceutical industry. God knows we keep hearing about any number of them being recalled because they were, only tested on men between the ages of 40 and 45, and yet the people who take them most are women under 35. All of that. So there's still you can see that there's some congestion at the industry level here. The other thing that sort of sticks in my craw a little bit, and I'm sure it does for you too, Lynn, is when you hear the federal government, say the Minister for Paying, the Health Minister, Greg Hunt, talk about the benefits to the community of establishing a medicinal cannabis industry here and how great it is for exports and all of that kind of thing, and yet we're struggling to get our own people who need it on it. I find that bizarre.
The ridiculous thing about that is, the countries that potentially we could export to are already looking after themselves.
Yeah.
Where are we going to export to? Australia would have to have the worst legislation in the entire world when it comes to cannabis.
It reminds me of uranium, Lynn. It's one of the things we're prepared to dig out of the ground and sell to everyone else to use, but we don't. You don't bloody use it here, not under any circumstances. Lynn, we'll stay across. The question I put to the minister earlier that Kay was a bit equivocal on. Would you prefer to see medicinal cannabis prescribed by GPs?
Absolutely. A GP, like Jeremy's GP has cared for him for 24 years. And that's a long time, and much easier to get access to a GP, and they're specialists in their field. And when you look at what Joe's been prescribed, for example, which is CBD, is a Schedule 4 medicine, yet I could go to the GP and get midazolam, which causes Jeremy to stop breathing, scheduled at the same level. It's bizarre that cannabis has to be so much more difficult and so much more controlled.
Yes, it is interesting, isn't it? It's not an accident, I don't think, Lynn, to be perfectly honest with you. How hopeful are you of getting Jeremy onto the controlled access scheme relatively quickly? What's the process here? Are you still playing?
Look, at the moment, our biggest concern is getting a specialist to care for him. The legal medicine is secondary to that, and we need a specialist who will take the time to get to know him and understand his condition. So I guess a process like that could take several months for them to be comfortable to prescribe a legal cannabinoid medicine. I honestly don't know. The best thing we can do is care for him as we are now.
And that means using medicinal cannabis you're growing yourself illegally?
Yeah, well, we have no choice.
No, I understand. No, I totally get that, Lynn. I totally get it.
And I mean, if we do go a legal route, that means we lose the health benefits of juicing the raw plant. There's lots of benefits to what we do, even though it's risky. But yeah, so.
Yeah. Well, I mean, more broadly, this is what happens when you've got 50 years of prohibition that effectively prevented any reasonable research being done on this product because it was effectively banned. You weren't allowed to do research on it because it was a Schedule 1, Schedule A, depending on what country you live in. What was the word they used? Narcotic.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Lynn, I appreciate your time. Good luck. I hope Jeremy's okay, and we will catch up soon.
Thanks very much, Brian.
Thanks, Lynn. She's a trooper. Tell you what, these mums, I have just so much respect for, because they effectively throw away the rest of their lives to focus on a good outcome for their kids. And in the case of the two women you've just heard, Kay Dick and Lynn Cleaver, collectively, they've sacrificed about 50 years to each of their two children. Combined, okay, about 25 years each. At what point do you offer these mums some hope and some sense that they're dealing with a compassionate and understanding health system, as opposed to something that's combative and just putting obstacles in the way for the sake of putting obstacles in the way? Look, again, I understand why you need to test medicines. I understand that. But there's been this massive experiment going on for 50-odd years all over the world, where cannabis is the most consumed recreational drug on the planet. Pretty good experiment, I would have thought. And so far, if somebody can find one fatality in the literature, as far as I know, the experts say there aren't any. Okay, I've done a bit of digging around just to check, because I don't believe things that experts just say for the sake of being experty. So you check. I've not been able to find one either. Somebody who died from an overdose or some adverse reaction to cannabis. Some people have psychotic reactions to it. There's no doubt about that. Some people do, and the outcomes for them are not great. But the direct causal, too much marijuana killed you. I can't. There's not one in the literature anywhere. Look, I'm not advocating people going out and doing this willy-nilly for what it's worth, but it just seems to me when the alternative is using an illicit supply that you're growing in your backyard versus having a legitimate supply coming through the normal health system, the latter has to be better. And in this case, people have got an alternative. If you have a really complicated, expensive, say, heart drug that you're prescribed, you can't sort of go off and grow a plant that'll do the same thing. So you have to take the drug. Here there's a choice. And people like Lynn are making that choice because the process is too difficult.
Another Tasmania Talks podcast. Go to tasmaniatalks.com.au for anything you've missed.